Here on KPTZ in Port Townsend, I'm Phil Andrus. This is Tossed Salad. Off the Grid, and Glad I Did, a book. This is in Maine, by golly. It was done in Maine by Christine Jamison. Now, I have known Christine not well, ever, but her daughter and my daughter were classmates, so we had some contact, and her husband, John, teaches in the schools at Chimacum, and I would encounter him, not because my children were in trouble. I don't even know if they were in his classes. But I would know him. I've known John. I've known Christine. And when we met at the optometrist's office, and you said you had a book, and you gave me the book, and it was about living off the grid, I realized that there was a lot about the Jamisons that I didn't know. It's not consistent with the image that I've had. But 8 years you did, living off the grid in the state of Maine, which is a challenging place to do such a thing. You're going to read from your book. This is a book that you've written, you've published, and you're selling here and there, doing readings elsewhere. Is that true?
I've done some. I intend to do more. That's
Where
right.
Where have you done readings?
In Maine.
Really?
Last summer, yeah.
So they relate to this maybe better than the Northwesterners do?
Well, I was a little hesitant about being in Maine and a book about Maine, but they loved it. So it worked out well.
And you're a Northwest girl by birth?
I've been here forever. That's right.
Well, except for 8 years. What prompted you to do such a crazy thing as to, one, move to Maine? It's a very different place.
Well, my husband is from Maine, and they call themselves maniacs. And we had visited Maine several times, but I never dreamed I'd live there. But he had 2 daughters there, and it was very important that we move back. So we packed up and drove 3,000 miles to Maine.
So what were the family discussions like that led up to that? Anybody ever get hurt? That's a major move.
It's a major move. Yeah, I actually cried the whole 3,000 miles. Tried not to show John. I have such a close family here. I knew we needed to go, but I just could not imagine not being handy and close to my family.
And your family is your parents and how many siblings?
3 siblings, yeah. But I knew we needed to do it, and I thought we'd be there forever, and here we are back.
And John's children at that time were what age? Ages?
Middle school and early high school.
So that was really the motivating factor, huh?
That was the only reason, right?
Not only the motivating factor, it was the only reason. And that answers the question I have in my list of questions. Why Maine? So where in Maine?
We lived in the western foothills, about 45 minutes from New Hampshire. I don't know if you're all familiar with Maine, but that's where we were, about 2 hours from Portland, Maine, which is the largest city.
So moving to Maine is one thing. Moving to the outback in Maine is yet another. Why not just live in Portland or Bangor or someplace civilized?
Right. Good question. Well, we first got there. We were in John's parents' house. They were snowbirds, spending the winter in Florida, wisely, I might add. And so we were in their house, and we had to have the water turned on, and so we called this man from the town of Dixfield, and turned out he was selling his house, and did we want to take a look at it? Well, so we did go take a look at it. We kept driving and driving and driving. I was sure that we had gone far too far, missed it, but we kept driving. Eventually, it was winter. We were just in no man's land in this little tiny road. We turned down it, and there was the house. We looked at lots of houses after this, but that was the house.
Did you, when you were headed out east, had you already decided you wanted to live in a very rural place?
All of Maine, for the most part, other than Portland and Augusta, it's rural and little villages. But no, we both love the wilderness. We both love camping, hiking. And so we're both willing to live way out, but this was way out. It took some prayer. It took a lot of discussions, a lot of thinking to really decide to live there.
More tears?
No tears on that, no.
Okay, you were settled by then, huh?
I was done in that department.
Okay, well, we have a bunch of other things to ask you, but you've saved aside 2 5-minute passages to read.
That's right.
And so I think we'd like to hear the first one now.
Okay.
And I should tell people that I'm talking with Christine Jamison, author of, and this title really rattles off the tongue. I guess you probably can imagine, you knew that it would. Off the Grid and Glad I Did. She's the author of that book.
This portion that I'm going to read has to do with trying to deal with the bugs in Maine in the spring. So we don't really know what bugs are like here. Maine has bugs, and the main bug that I was concerned about was the black fly. And they fly around in swarms. They're very tiny. They're sneaky. They climb up your pant legs and up your sleeves of your tops and up your hair and all over. And so I was trying to plant a garden. So this is about something I'd heard about a neighbor. Mary is an independent 82-year-old woman living alone on a farm. She has some local notoriety as the University of Maine has done 2 interviews with her on public television. They describe her as a self-sufficient farm wife. According to the program, Mary has goats, chickens, rabbits, ducks, and a milking cow in the barn. The local newspaper quoted her as saying, "Work and more work is what keeps you young." Because Mary is a neighbor, and I am curious to meet her, I stopped to buy eggs and introduce myself. My real motive, of course, is to find out the bug secret so I can get my garden planted. As I drive in on her road, I approach a ramshackle house and a small barn. Knocking at the front door, I hear, "Come on in," from inside the house. The interior is dark, stifling hot, and cluttered. The kitchen counters are covered with dishes, and the living room is crammed full of furniture, cats, dogs, squirrels in cages, and various other critters that I can't see well enough in the low light to identify. Toothless Mary is seated when I enter and is friendly as I inquire about buying eggs. I have heard profanity before, and even uttered some myself in younger years, but Mary's caustic language wins the swearing award and actually colors the air between us. Sheesh. When she gets on her feet to walk, her back stays parallel to the floor, with what must be a debilitating case of osteoporosis. She is a tough old gal, and I recognize how hard it must be for her to complete even simple tasks, so I offer to help. I accompany her to the barn to assist with chores. She puts her milking supplies on a plastic sled and pulls it the short distance to the barn. I am horrified to see her goats and cow tied to the walls of the barn with ropes so short they are barely able to lie down. She does this so she can manage the animals better. Putting a stool next to the cow, she squirts the milk into a pail. We move the cow outside to graze. Must be an incredible relief for the animal to get out of the confines of the barn. I don't see any vegetable garden, but I'm assuming that it's because Mary can't manage one in her physical condition. I hope it isn't because of tormenting bugs. The eggs I purchased from Mary are covered with chicken poop and hay, which I clean off later. She makes butter, which is sold in a local grocery store in nearby Mexico, Maine, and enjoys a devoted following, among them John's brother Norm. She uses an old-fashioned churn and then puts the pure fat in a mold, which imprints her insignia on it. She is a worker. Thankfully, Mary is willing to share her bug secret with me. As it turns out, it's more of a technique to fool the bugs than a concoction to put on the skin. Mary instructs me to take a hard hat, cover it with foil, rub motor oil over the foil, and put it on my head. The small-brained black flies are attracted to anything that glitters. In this case, it's the glistening foil. Anything to give me the upper hand in this bug battle I will try. In fact, I hope they all drown in the oil. Normally, I'm a tender-hearted person, but this is war. Okay, I have the necessary equipment to go to battle with these annoying flies. Look out, flies, I'm ready for you. With my bug helmet in place and garden tools at the ready, I'm equipped. Arriving at the garden area with my helmet on, the flies instantly materialize and descend as a mist around my head. They have been waiting for me. The shadows below me on the ground prove there are thousands of the fiends buzzing around my head, ready to land on my body and suck my blood. Amazingly, the little bugs fly near my face but don't land, as they are entranced by the shiny oil. While working the soil, planting and marking the rows, and watering the garden, this huge, moving halo stays with me. You can be sure I don't enjoy gardening with thousands of flies keeping me company, but my skin is not getting bitten. Each time furious buzzing reverberates in my ears and a fly gets stuck in the oil, I count it 1 for me. After working the soil for several hours and planting hundreds of vegetable seeds, I am hot and sweaty. A wheelbarrow would have been of great help, but the money for that was needed elsewhere. After carrying untold clumps of weeds to the designated compost pile on one end of the garden, my clothes are filthy and my face is dirty. I also have untold oil-covered bugs stuck to my hat. Do I hear a car coming in the driveway? Sure enough, someone's coming. Quickly, a decision has to be made. Do I want to remove my hard hat and uncover a sweaty mass of helmet hair, or accept whatever consequences may unfold by leaving the helmet in place? I wait too long, and the decision is made for me. A small car pulls in, and a dark-haired woman emerges. With a smile, she says, "Hello, my name is Janice, and my husband and I have a camp at the pond where we stay for the summer." This is a neighborly gesture, which I appreciate. "How nice to meet you, Janice. I'm Christine." I'm mortified when she glances up at my bug helmet, where her eyes linger. With no visible reaction or pause, she continues chatting on as if oil-covered, oil-smeared, fly-covered hard hats are the norm here in Maine. I like that. Maybe people here are accepting of others and all their oddities. Not one to explain things if not asked, I don't mention my unusual choice of headgear, and we have a pleasant chat.
Well, as I said, Christine, my image of the Jamisons does not include that kind of headgear. And I don't recall a picture. There are pictures in your book, but I don't recall there you are. There is a picture, and I had not seen it. You look very official and bug-free. So there are people who were born in Maine and live their entire lives in Maine. Do they become accustomed to these black flies and other insects that want to suck their blood?
I think people in Maine have a good sense of humor. They accept things like that. They know bugs are going to be coming out in the spring, and at least where we lived, it was the middle of May to the middle of June were black flies. And then the middle of June, there was some overlap, but about the middle of June, the mosquitoes came out. And they lasted until, middle of July. And then there were good bugs.
For example?
Fireflies.
Ah, really?
Beautiful, incredible fireflies. We had a meadow down below the house, about a 3-acre meadow. And they were attracted to that and the warm humidity. And there would just be thousands of them. And the moths in Maine are like these fantastical nighttime butterflies, beautifully colored.
And so the friendly insects, or at least the scenic ones, came later in the season?
Well, the fireflies were the end of June, and the moths were throughout the summer.
Okay. And then came winter.
Winter.
With its own challenge. No bugs. No
bugs, but wow. Living here, you can't be prepared.
Were you ready for that?
No.
Did John tell you, oh, by the way, Christine, it snows a lot in Maine?
I knew winters were harsh, but you have to live it. We had quite a ways to plow in and out. Our road came out onto the township of Woodstock, which at that time was not plowed by Woodstock because it was just seasonal cabins up the road. So we had to plow down that road to where the town of Peru started. And
interesting names in Maine. Peru and Mexico are 2 towns in Maine, right?
Right, and Norway, and there's all kinds. They named them after countries.
Where they came from, I guess, huh?
Right, well, could be. Mm-hmm. I thought they could be more original, but...
So you picked a place to live that had its own challenges because it was not connected to the electrical grid. And was it connected to the phone grid? Did you have telephone?
The people that built the home, the ones before us, had paid for 3 miles worth of telephone lines. This is before cell phones. So we did have telephone, although we lost it several times due to electrical storms. If we were home during a storm, we'd unplug the phone. But if we weren't, we'd lose it many times.
Mm-hmm. But electricity you had to make yourself.
We had a generator when we bought the house.
Was that part of what you expected to do when you chose to move to Maine?
No, it wasn't. But, you just
But why then? Why did you do this?
Well, we did it. For one, John is one of those guys that's always dreamed of a big piece of land. And I love the wilderness. I love being in the woods, and camping, hiking, and it was so private and absolutely gorgeous. We had a view of some, they call them mountains. They're really hills by our standards, but mountains in the distance. And just so much privacy. The big 3-acre meadow we dug it out and made a pond. Well, they call them ponds. It's a lake by our standards. Beautiful lake that we ice skated on and swam in.
Sounds romantic.
It was wonderful. A lot of good things.
Mm-hmm.
Winter was severe, though. The plowing and it was so cold. Just unbelievable.
How many cords of wood to heat your house?
Right. That's a good question. It was a full basement. I'm guessing it was 10 or so. Yeah.
No, I cut 3 cords, and I regard that as a fair amount of work. 10 cords sounds formidable. And was that mostly John's work?
Yes. Well, John did the cutting, and he would try to cut the trees around the property that needed cutting rather than healthy trees, the trees that didn't look as good, or to clear out so other trees could grow better. So he was the one that did that. I usually got recruited for the hauling to the truck, and then hauling into the house.
And what years were these?
This was 84 to 93.
Okay, and the reason I ask
right?
that is the technology for homemade power nowadays, and my work has been in boat wiring, and so there's a lot of crossover between boat wiring and off-the-grid homes. And I have watched the technology take great leaps forward.
Right.
But the technologies were fairly primitive back in 1984.
Right, and we had solar panels. We had 5, and our neighbor on the other mountain, who lived there at the same time we did, we visited her last summer, and she had 21 solar panels and had all the energy she could possibly need. So, yeah.
And they're expensive, but nowadays there is a federal subsidy. There may not be any longer. So there was some help with those solar panels for some people.
Right, and we had help as well from the government during that year. It was a 40% tax return on it.
Did you find that the technologies you were using were reliable and sufficient?
Yeah, everything worked well. The panels worked fine. We just had to be sure we didn't use too much energy to drain the batteries. And we had a dial that showed us how much energy we were using at any time. So we became very energy conscious. You could see when you turned on your computer what it did to the energy that was available. And this was at night. During the day, you could pretty much do anything, and you had enough energy because the panels continued to charge. The generator we lost one time in an electrical storm. There was lightning actually striking in the yard around. It was so loud. It was absolutely deafening. And after the storm, I went and looked around, and everything looked fine, but the generator didn't start. But the panels, they were reliable, and other than the generator and losing our phone occasionally, things worked well.
And in the course of it all, you adopted a little girl.
We did, yes.
My daughter's friend.
Right. And she was from India. She still is. She's 26 now. So that was quite an experience. I felt like it was a 2-year pregnancy for us, 2 years of paperwork, but completely worth it. We went to Boston to pick her up. She'd actually come to Seattle from India and went through immigration here, and then flew to New York, and then from New York to Boston, where we picked her up. It's very exciting when someone hands you a child and says, "Here's your daughter." Just instant.
And she probably didn't know she was headed not someplace like India, but someplace dramatically not like India, the interior of the state of Maine.
Completely opposite. That's right, in many, many ways.
So you raised Chelsea. I wonder if she's listening, do you think?
She's not. She's at work, but this is going to be put on my website, and she'll hear it then.
She'll hear it then. And I don't mean to say that goats and children have anything in common, but that's the next thing on my notes here. You raised goats for a while.
We had goats, and didn't give it a lot of forethought. John saw in the paper that 2 kids were for sale, Toggenburg goats, and did we want goats? And I said, well, sure, why not? We have a barn. Well, our barn didn't have a door, and we didn't have anything fenced, but we went and got the goats, and I loved the goats. They were smart, perky.
But they got lost once.
They did. Well, they're hard to keep penned. They're very smart, and they'll spend all of their awake hours trying to get out of their penned area. And so after a while, I gave up and just let them run. They were a lot like deer, but I'd always find them at night. I could call and they'd come, or I'd be able to round them up. One particular time I couldn't find them. This was winter. They didn't come. Next night, they didn't come either. And so I started looking pretty seriously for them, and looked and looked and looked. More snow fell, got colder. They ended up being gone almost a week. But I found them. I hiked one whole Saturday.
You found them, they didn't find you?
No, I was calling them, and I was quite a ways from the house, and I think they heard me because I saw 3 prints. And at that time we had a kid. So the 2 adults and 1 kid, and they were headed towards the house. And then when I got a little closer to the house, I could hear my husband hollering into the woods, "The goats are back, the goats are back." And their undersides were covered with ice, and they were shivering, and very glad to see me.
Did they tell you where they had gone and why?
They were trying to, but we have, it's limited what they could say, right?
I have a few more questions, but you have a second passage to read.
I do.
Talking to Christine Jamison, author of Off the Grid and Glad I Did. Christine now lives in Port Hadlock, but as you well know from listening for the last 20 minutes, used to live in the state of Maine.
Maine has about 12,000 miles of snowmobile trails. So cross-country skiers have access to these trails. So that's what this portion's about. I get an invitation from Joyce to go cross-country skiing on snowmobile trails not far from our place during our first winter living up on the hill. Skiers have the benefit of this network of trails, but have to quickly step off to the side when hearing a machine coming, giving them the right-of-way. The sky is a spectacular sapphire blue as we park on the Dickvale Road and head in the opposite direction from which I traveled with Willis and Snipe. She leads the way as we set out, pushing ahead with each leg, developing a pace with increasing momentum. We are on a woods road that is quite open and fairly level. There are rabbit tracks on the snow and some flitting chickadees in the trees, but no other evidence of life as we quietly slide along among the hushed trees. The trail escalates upward in steep curves, which we negotiate without too much trouble. But I'm getting concerned about the inevitable return trip, when I will need to go down these steep declines. Joyce is impressive as she maintains a brisk, heart-thumping pace. I begin to wonder where we're going to turn around, as we have been trekking at a fast pace for an hour and a half, heading deep into the forest. Finally, Joyce stops and we chat while turning ourselves around and heading back. The narrow trail is not wide enough to perform the slowing snowplow technique, which is the only way I know how to slow down with this type of ski. Joyce takes off, quickly gaining speed on the downward slope, and is rapidly out of sight as she rounds a bend in the distance. All alone, with nothing but my loud breathing, I muster a little courage and launch myself. Starts out well enough until I begin speeding up and am very quickly flying down the mountain. As I hang on to my poles, trying to remain upright, a curve looms ahead, which I wildly and unsuccessfully try to lean into, pitching head first into the soft snow. Nothing breaks except a bit of my pride as I realize my skills at this sport need some sharpening. Joyce must have successfully coped with the sharp angle because she's out of sight. With the snow clinging to me, I resemble a snow woman on skis. Pushing off again, I am able to negotiate the next bend and thankfully see both a flat stretch and Joyce up ahead. On the very steep parts, I begin sitting down on the back of my skis with arms extended into the snow for slowing and just ride it out in this rather ungainly manner. It works quite well, as falling becomes more of a tipping over than a headlong plunge into the snowdrifts. I am definitely out of my comfort zone zipping down the vertical sections, but am enjoying it immensely at the same time. It's hard to beat the cost of skiing here, nothing, and the convenience of trails being minutes from the house. Wilma, Joyce's sister, also lives in West Peru and has a big chunk of land with a camp on it given to her by Willis. Wilma, Joyce, and I decide to ski into Wilma's camp from her house in the village. Willis offers to meet us there in his snowmobile for lunch. He will have the camp warm when we arrive and will drive us home from the Dickvale Road. We are blessed with another bright, sunny day, but the wind is bitterly cold. Wilma wisely wears a knit face mask covering the bottom of her face, and I stretch my turtleneck up to cover mine. My long johns have become my steady companions in the constant quest to stay warm. Dressed for the weather we are, but I feel the piercing cold of the biting wind anyway. We cross the road at Wilma's to enter the woods where, mercifully, the wind's force is blocked. The tops of the trees continue to bend back and forth wildly in the gale. Shortly, we come to a mutual friend's house and stop for a visit and to warm up. This is our only stop until we reach Wilma's camp, about 10 miles further up the trail. Fortified, we start out across the field, heads down and eyes watering from the icy blast slamming into us. The tears traveling down my face quickly freeze into facial ice ribbons. Even with all the large muscle movement cross-country skiing requires, I don't warm up. There is no escaping the cold of the wind as it continually pummels me, penetrating my clothing and body to the bone. These sub-zero conditions mean business. There is no relief for the three of us until we reach the shelter of the trees on the far side of the field, where it is amazingly calm and soundless. When it's cold in Maine, it is really cold. Once in the woods, it's tough going, up and down short, choppy hills and winding around trees. These trails are definitely designed for snowmobiles, not skiers.
A good place to stop indeed. We have only a couple of minutes left. If you would have stayed in Maine, I would not be talking to you. I would never have met you. I would never have met John. Hillary would never have met Chelsea.
That's right.
Why did you leave?
Well, just very quickly, I came home here 1 February, and I left 30 below, and just deep, deep snow, middle of winter. And when the airplane came above Seattle, there was green lawn. We hadn't seen our lawn since November. There were blossoms on the trees, and I didn't even need a coat. And I just couldn't get over how mild and wonderful it was. So my first words to John when I got back were, I want to move back to Washington.
And John said?
Okay. What a great guy.
Good
he just
for
said,
you.
Okay.
He was ready too, perhaps, huh?
Maybe, yeah, so.
Okay. Your book, Off the Grid, and Glad I Did, is available where?
It's on my website, ChristineJJamison.com, and that's Jamison with an O. And it's also available, the digital version, on Smashwords.com, any digital version. And it's shortly going to be available, the paperback, on Amazon.
Very well. Thank you for coming in.
Thank you very much for having me.
You look like you're comfortable. You would probably be wearing more clothes if you were in the state of Maine today at a radio station in the state of Maine.
Absolutely.
Indeed. Okay, it's been fun.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, too. I've been talking to Christine Jamison here in the KPTZ in Port Townsend, Washington.